This video was produced by OOWK Media. Proof that aliens created mankind exists in ancient biblical texts. During the past few decades, thousands of ancient Sumerian texts and cuneiforms have been discovered in ancient Mesopotamia, which we know as modern-day Iraq. These translations by respected scholars and scientists throughout the world have revealed an incredibly detailed scientific account of the biblical story of creation. It's not at all what they were expecting. In the 1960s, author Heinrich von Däniken presented the radical premise that the gods and angels reported in their stories of the Bible were actually ancient astronauts who had been misidentified. New archaeological discoveries are being made and presented that not only strengthen this premise, they have presented new evidence that provide the most incredible answers to many of mankind's deepest questions. Questions like, who am I? Where do I come from? And why am I here? And this time, the collective wave of information brings with it scholars, scientists, and archaeologists bearing strangely convincing proof. We were first told the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, came directly from God during the period beginning about 1300 BC to 300 BC. Therefore, it began about 3,300 years ago and was completed about 1,000 years later. Next, we learned the Greek Bible was plagiarized from the Hebrew Bible, and then came the discovery that the Hebrew Bible was plagiarized from the Sumerian Bible. Sumerian was the first written language known to have ever existed. Whoever the translators of the later Bibles were, they certainly left out an incredible amount of very important information. And as amazing as the translations seem, even now they somehow begin to make both logical and scientific sense. The Book of Genesis and the Hebrew Bible were based on the Sumerian story of creation. For at least 2,000 years, Hebrew numerologists and scientists of the Kabbalah have been searching the Old Testament for God's grand code. An original manuscript of a rare Kabbalistic text, the Sefer Yetzirah, is also known as the Book of Creation. It's the oldest book in the Hebrew occult tradition. It describes how God created the universe and all living things using the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It was recently discovered that the 22 letters represent the 22 amino acids used as the building blocks of human DNA. The secret to the creation of mankind was DNA manipulation by the gods. How did the Sumerians know about human DNA over 5,000 years ago? Now, our accumulated volumes of knowledge are saying, in the most remarkable way, that these writings are scientifically based, authentic, and their content is provable. The Old Testament was based on Sumerian text and cuneiforms dating back from a period of 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. There are literally thousands of these recovered records still awaiting translation. They intricately tell us about everything relating to life during this time, from sales receipts and family matters to their story of creation. It's a story which clearly reveals that our modern-day Bible stories descended directly from these ancient texts, and there was much more that was left out of the Bible, stories that we were all taught. As remarkable as this seems, this is what it says. The Sumerian story of creation picks up over 4.5 billion years ago when the original Earth, Tiamat, collided with a great celestial body, Marduk, forming our moon. Today's scientists estimate that event to have occurred around 4.5 billion years ago. How could this have possibly been written 4,000 to 5,000 years ago? How did they know all of the planets in our solar system, including Marduk and Tiamat, and that their collision also resulted in the creation of Earth as we know it? The planetary giants struck each other at an angle, leaving all land mass on one side of the planet known as Pangaea, while leaving a huge gap on the other side with the oceans filling it in. Over hundreds of millions of years, Pangaea slowly split into the 7 continents we recognize today. This is exactly what today's scientists say happened. Again, how could this have been written 4 to 5 millennia in the past? Modern science didn't even know all of the planets in our solar system until about 100 years ago. The Sumerian story of creation includes descriptions of life on a planet in our solar system that we have yet to discover. Its name is Nibiru. It has an oval orbit that takes 3,600 years to travel around our Sun. About 500,000 years ago, the atmosphere on Nibiru was greatly damaged and diminished by a cataclysmic celestial disaster, and those who lived there had to find a way to repair it in order to survive. They knew that by putting enough gases and dust back into the atmosphere, this damage could be mended. The metal that by far worked the best for this purpose was gold, because no other substance can be pulverized into such a fine powder and make to stay aloft in the atmosphere. It's also inert and won't combine with any other substance. It's interesting to note that NASA launched a rocket in the early 1970s which was meant to search for extraterrestrial life. It included a gold disk which identified Earth and many of its features, including mankind. It is estimated that this gold disk has a lifespan of 2 billion to 4 billion years. Gold was extremely rare on Nibiru, but they had remarkable technology and were able to scan the solar system to find the presence of gold. They first found it in an asteroid belt and attempted to mine it there. They lost many astronauts and spaceships, and their efforts were a failure. The leader of the astronauts, Anu, again scanned the solar system for gold and got readings from Earth. He landed on our planet about 445,000 years ago. Their story about the trip to Earth is truly remarkable. The descriptions of seeing Earth up close for the first time are breathtaking. When they first see the details of Earth emerge from the darkness of space, they describe it as having a white top and white bottom with blue around the middle, clearly identifying the Arctic and Antarctica with the oceans around the temperature zone. The creation of mankind. The Sumerian story of creation states there was much gold on Earth, and the Anunnaki began to mine it from the ocean. But this was too slow. They realized that to get the great quantities they needed, they had to get gold from within the Earth. They brought 50 more astronauts from Nibiru to help with the mining efforts. They established a base on Mars to store gold awaiting shipment to Nibiru. The reason for this base was that the gravitational pull on Mars was significantly less than that on Earth. Shipping from Mars saved them much time and energy. How did these writings correctly identify that the gravitational force on Mars was much less than that of Earth? Those stationed on Mars hated working there and eventually rebelled. One of the alien rulers, Enki, decided to create a class of worker beings through DNA manipulation. He chose an existing species of hominids, which had the potential for success. They created a breeding area known as the Eden. This is where they created an entirely new species, specifically designed for mining gold. They combined hominid DNA with their own DNA. The result was the being of mankind. DNA was first identified in the late 1860s by Swiss chemist Friedrich Miescher. How was DNA included in the Sumerian Bible thousands of years ago? The DNA creation was successful, but the new beings were hybrids, therefore sterile and unable to reproduce. After several failures, they were eventually successful, and the new breed was called the Adamu, the first humans. Their numbers multiplied rapidly. This is what the original Bible says. That's just a tiny part of their creation story. It was carved into stone nearly 5,000 years ago. How can all these words possibly be explained? It's impossible to deny the existence of these writings. They exist. They're authentic. They've been translated by numerous scholars, a task which has taken 3 decades, and this is what they clearly state. But it's clearly not what religions and governments necessarily want to hear. The Sumerian Bible even reveals the cause of the Great Flood. They explain that approximately 12,000 years ago, when their planet passed through our solar system, there was such a huge gravitational force exerted on Earth that it caused the ice shelf of Antarctica to collapse and slide into the ocean. How could they have even known there was an ice cap on Antarctica? They still thought the Earth was flat, or so we were taught. It was stated that the aliens, gods, the Anunnaki, did not cause this climatic event, but they could have prevented it. They chose not to intervene because by this time mankind was everywhere and out of control and in such disarray that they chose to let them perish and then to start anew. It was Enki, the doctor scientist, creator of humankind, who warned Zuzudra of the coming flood. Zuzudra was the man who was renamed Noah a few thousand years later. He was told that he and his entire family should collect DNA samples of all the various species of animals and plants to preserve them for life after the flood. A 6,000-year-old Sumerian seal accurately depicts all of the planets in our solar system. Modern science only discovered our complete solar system about 100 years ago. Is this too much information to digest? People have found religious doctrine to be immensely inefficient, lacking in credibility. They were interesting but nearly impossible to believe. Once you slowly began to digest and understand this new alien point of view, the Bible actually comes alive. This new knowledge explained so many things in the Bible, from Adam and Eve to Moses and the burning bush on the mountain to the virgin birth of Christ, which explains the heavenly origin of Jesus. When angels are presented as actual flesh and blood beings, the Watchers and gods, who were the Anunnaki rulers, the Nephilim, who defined by their technology and not their magic, an entirely new picture emerges. It's one of wonderment, hope, and inspiration. Archaeologists have now discovered the ruins of Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey. They are estimated to be the size of a modern city and will take another 30 years to fully excavate. Its age has been scientifically proven to be between 11,000 and 12,000 years old. The oldest human society ever discovered on Earth. Another 6,000 years older than the Sumerian Bible. It was built before the Great Flood and was meticulously buried in sand to be saved from the Great Flood by those who knew such an event was coming. And even though this society had no written language, they did have images carved in stone and they had statues and symbols. These statues included carvings of what seemed to be the double helix, a representation of the DNA molecule. They also include statues of heads which have huge eyes, are somewhat triangular shaped and eerily resemble the heads of creatures we have come to know as the Greys. They clearly express a story of the gods who came to Earth in spaceships and through DNA manipulation created mankind as a slave species to mine gold. It described their planet, and these gods were clearly shown to be the Anunnaki. And it is now believed that Göbekli Tepe was the Eden where they engineered the first humans, the Adamu. There is coming a time where the information that is taught in our schools will confirm and not contradict the body of proof thus far discovered by our scientific community. A new wave of spirituality will be awakened in mankind. It will be born from knowledge. It will be fueled by the hundreds of books that will soon be written about the newly discovered evidence. But this information changes everything. It's already out there. It's been published. It's already begun to spread. This time, truth will be provable and science, not religion, will be its teacher.
The legends of Greece and Rome appear to have been based on genuine historical figures and actual events. These classical heroes are flesh and blood characters from our ancestral past. The Pleiadians were the ancestral people of all European peoples. They lived mostly in the North Aegean, and they preserved a common non-Greek language. The Greeks used the name to describe the original pre-Greek inhabitants of Greece and the Aegean area, with whom they sometimes included the Etruscans. See, the ancient Greeks were called Pleiadians, and I connect this with the Pleiadians of the star cluster the seven sisters. So, in my eyes, that these were the ancient gods, these were the ancient astronauts, if you like, that was battling the Anunnaki, which were the Egyptians. In the Pleiadian creation myth, it talks about the goddess of all things. She spontaneously generates the serpent who mates with her. She lays the cosmic egg and bids the serpent to incubate it by coiling 7 times around it until it splits in two and hatches all things that exist. In the soil of Arcadia, the Pleiadians would spring up from the serpent's teeth, scattered under the heel of the goddess of all things, who kicked the serpent from their home on Mount Olympus. So is Mount Olympus somewhere that's not on this earth? Both being ancient civilizations, the Armenians and Greeks have coexisted for centuries. There are ancient notes by Greek historians suggesting of the roots of Armenians. The earliest reference to Armenia was made by a Greek historian in 525 BC. According to the hypothesis proposed by linguists during the 20th century, the Armenian and Greek languages share a common ancestor. This has led to the proposal of the Greco-Armenian language, postdating the Proto-Indo-European language. Herodotus suggests that the Armenians are descendants of the Phrygians. Plato had earlier noticed the similarities between the Greek and Pleiadian languages. Pleiadian, it just sounds like Pleiadians again. The Armenians' homeland, before their migration, was a valley in Thessaly, after which they are named. A chain of ancient references show a close relation between the two peoples. A team from the Institute of Science of Human History in Germany analysed the DNA of 93 Egyptian mummies, dating from approximately 1400 BCE to 400 CE. The evidence for their study reveals a surprisingly close relation to ancient people of the Near East, such as Armenians. Ancient people believed that mankind evolved in Armenia, built a high civilization, but was destroyed by a great flood, after which the remnants spread to all directions. The Holy Bible places the Garden of Eden in Armenia, and the genesis of human races around the Mount Ararat, upon which landed Noah's Ark, but probably the greatest contribution of the Armenian Highlanders to mankind has been the creation of alphabetic writing. It was this revolutionary concept of script which was destined to become the foundation for which all ancient and modern alphabets evolved. Prominent scholars agree that the alphabet was invented by the historic Hyksos people during their domination of the Near East between the 18th and 16th centuries before Christ. But who were these enigmatic Hyksos? Around 1900 BC, a group of these Armenian tribesmen burst out of their homeland and carved out a powerful empire encompassing Syria, Palestine and Egypt. Known to the classical Greeks as Hyksos, they ruled over Egypt for 150 years, from 1730 BC until their expulsion by a resurgent Egypt in 1580 BC. The Hyksos introduced the horse and the spoked-wheel chariot, bronze and Iron Age weapons and hardware, scale armour and war helmet, the composite bow, a complete calendar, and the building of walled cities fortified by moats. They brought to Egypt improved methods of spinning and weaving, new musical instruments, the humpback bull, the olive and the pomegranate trees. As a ruling aristocracy, they supplanted feudalism over the democratic patriarchal system of the Semitic tribes and introduced the one universal sun god. The Hyksos founded Jerusalem, the holy city. The sub-Saharan African genetic influx seems to have only started after the Roman period, which coincides with the advent of monotheism, in particular Islam. Hence why modern Egyptians are more genetically shifted towards African people than the ancient Egyptians. The most typical skeletons of the white race have been found in the Caucasus, after which this race is called Caucasian. This indicates that the Armenian and Georgian mountains of the Caucasus were the birthland of the white race. The first group of Indo-European migrants arrived in the Levant at the beginning of the Middle Bronze Age. Their distinctive houses, graves and personal ornaments indicating an origin in Anatolia. These elite settlers, although a minority, took over the rule of the early Bronze Age cities, especially the coastal ports, and grew welfare through maritime trade. Eventually their descendants occupied Egypt as the Hyksos, ruling over the local Canaanite population, which arrived at the Avaris in the century following the departure of the Proto-Israelites from that city towards the end of the 13th dynasty. According to Josephus, the Bible Hebrews were in reality the Hyksos, which, as translated by modern Egyptologists, mean foreign kings. Something to note here is the English alphabet is the most similar graphically to the ancient Hebrew alphabet out of all alphabets today, including Jewish square script Hebrew, mainly because the 10 lost tribes of Israel settled in Western nations via Europe after their exile in Assyria. The Hyksos were subdued and were indeed driven out of other parts of Egypt, but were shut up in a place that contained 10,000 acres. This place was named Avaris, which the shepherds built a wall around all this place, which was a large and strong wall, and this in order to keep all their possessions and their prey within the place of strength. But for Moses made an attempt to take them by force and by siege, with 480,000 men to lie row-tongue about them. But upon his despair of taking the place of siege, they came to a composition with them, that they should leave Egypt and go without any harm to be done to them. So basically the Hyksos surrendered. They was obviously surrounded by this large army. They surrendered and they come to an agreement that they'd let them go free. That's what this is describing. And obviously the town with the large wall, this is Jerusalem. Apophis, Hyksos king of ancient Egypt, who initially controlled much of Egypt, but was driven back northward to the vicinity of his capital in the Nile River Delta by the successive attacks by the Theban pharaohs. This means that Apophis became king of Egypt in virtually the same year as the Pharaoh eruption in the Aegean, which is dated 1628 BC. We're going to talk more about this Pharaoh eruption. I think this is when the nuclear war happened at the time of this Pharaoh eruption. From this dating, the Hyksos were far from being the ancestors of the biblical Jews. They are way too early, having ruled over 200 years before Abram. Archaeology has revealed that the Hyksos invaded Egypt from Palestine and were composed of various foreign peoples who were not related to the Egyptians, Babylonians or Assyrians. Greek mythology offers the best explanation for the identity of the Hyksos in that they were Greeks and people who dwelled on the Black Sea coast who migrated to Egypt at the time of the abduction of Lau by Zeus, which occurred in about 1675 BC. The Epirus, who are mentioned in Egyptian inscriptions, were characterized as bandits who rode on horses and drove chariots. The historical evidence for a Greek empire, which covered the Mediterranean, lies in the account of the Empire of Atlantis that was given to Solon by the Egyptian priest of Neith shortly before his death in 559 BC, and the account of the abduction of Lau and her marriage to the king of Egypt. This story of Atlantis, later referred to by Plato, quoting Socrates, is as follows. 9,000 years before Solon, the Atlanteans, so called after their first king Atlas, ruled over all of Europe as far as the Pillars of Hercules, including all of Asia Minor, Palestine and Africa, except for Egypt, from their island in the Aegean Sea, known to them as Atlantic. So this describes the Anunnaki, that they controlled the whole of Europe and all of the world really. The Atlanteans were expelled from all of Europe by the Athenians and forced to flee to Egypt. The Athenians' victory did not last long, since shortly afterwards the greatest volcanic eruption in the last 15,000 years destroyed their home, the island of Thera in the Pleiades, and almost wiped out the Proto-Greek civilization in 1628 BC. Egypt then recovered its kingdom. The eruption, I think, was the nuclear war that happened. Putting the dates together, we have a date of between 1695 to 1675 BC for the expulsion of the Atlanteans from Europe, which corresponds to the start of the reign of the Hyksos. The term Atlanteans come from Atlas, their first king. When Solon wrote the account down, he re-Hellenized the name Hyksos to Atlas, as Plato explains in his text. The Atlantean rule over Egypt came to an end in about 1550 BC, give or take 60 years, which corresponds to the reign over Amos, who ruled jointly over Egypt from 1551 BC. This account is also backed up by the Greek king list, which placed the first man at this time Amadin the father of Car and Lydus, during whose time there was an 18-year-long famine referred to by Herodotus in the first book of his histories. This famine would have been caused by the so-called nuclear winter resulting from the Thera eruption. Prior to this event, all Greek records were assumed to be destroyed. The Hyksos invasion indicates that the inhabitants of Palestine during this period were Europeans, as does the story of Noah, whose flood occurred at the same time as the Thera eruption. According to the biblical account, the son of Noah was an ancestor of all the Greeks and the Thracians. Noah's son Ham was the ancestors of all the Hittites, and Noah's son Shem was the ancestors of all the Lydians, all of whom are European peoples. This European origin has been demonstrated by modern analysts of Y chromosome DNA, which shows that the M172 DNA lineage, which originated in Anatolia, was also the dominant lineage of Minoan Greece, Phoenicia, and after that, the M35 lineage, which originated in Egypt. The DNA lineage of the modern Jew is predominantly M89, the same as that of the Arabs. So let's now consider another candidate for who the Jews were. The goddess Isis appeared in his sleep and blamed him that her temple had been demolished in the war, but the sacred scribe said to him that if he would purge Egypt of the men who had pollutions upon them, he should be no longer troubled with such frightful apparitions. He accordingly chose out 250,000 that were thus diseased and cast them out. Moses, wishing to secure the future of his authority over the nation, gave them a noble form of worship, opposed to all that is practiced by other men. In their holy place they have consecrated an image of the animal by whose guidance they found deliverance from their long and thirsty wanderings. But this text by Tacitus, if you read it halfway through, it describes they abstained from swine's flesh in consideration of what they suffered when they were infected by leprosy, to which this animal is liable. So this is why they still don't eat pork, because it reminds them of when they was cast out of Egypt. According to the Bible, when David captured the city of Jerusalem, he expelled all the lepers from it, and all the people who were deformed or diseased. This tallies with the account of Manetho, who says that Avaris was set up by the Egyptians as a leper colony, just prior to the Exodus. Even at the time of Christ, the Bible says Jerusalem was full of lepers and the sick. The whole story about the people being sick and leprous most probably originated as an allegory for the destruction of the people of Avaris, being unclean and unlawful, meaning that they were criminals. In the Middle Ages, the people most likely to become lepers were prisoners kept in dungeons, since the Epirus are described as bandits in Egyptian records. This explains the origin of the Bible story about the Egyptians giving their gold to the so-called Hebrews on the day of the Exodus. In reality, the Epirus stole it. Menempho's account clearly distinguishes the current occupants of Avaris, i.e. the lepers, from the previous occupants, the Hyksos, as separate peoples. The Menempho stele also distinguishes the people of Israel as the Epirus as different peoples, whereas the Bible says that the Hebrews and Israelites were the same people. So was that changed to encompass all these people? Why did they change the story?
Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
The identity of the sea peoples the Egyptians expelled from Egypt in the reign of Ramses III was the Greeks. This can be seen if we read the inscription of Ramses III, which can be shown to corroborate the events which ancient Greek historians say occurred after the Trojan War. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms, from Hatti, Kode, Carchemish, Arzawa, and Alishion, being cut off. A camp was set up in one place, Amaru. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which had never come into being. They were coming forward toward Egypt, while the flame was prepared before them. Their confederation was the Peliset, Tjeka, Skiklesh, Danaan, and Weshesh, lands united. They laid their hands upon the land as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting, our plans will succeed. The Peliset were also known as the Philistines, who archaeologists have shown were Mycenaean Greeks. These people were therefore Pelasgian Greeks. The Pelasgian tribes of Greece included the Arcadians and the Athenians. According to Greek historians, after the Trojan War, the Arcadian king Agapna and the Athenian king Demophon both migrated to Cyprus. Since the play Helen by Euripides dates to 405 BC, and the version of the story given by Herodotus dates to 460 BC, and this is the most recent attempt to mythologize Greco-Egyptian history, and the Bible is less consistent with the truth than the Helen story, the Old Testament must have been written and mythologized at a much later date. The Bible makes out that the Hebrews and Israelites are the same people when in fact they are different peoples. The Greek histories mention all the peoples who invaded Egypt with Menelaus after the Trojan War correctly, all of whom were Greeks, thus the Greeks are clearly relating their own history. So now we know the basis of the Exodus story. It is clear that the Bible was created by joining together past historical events in a semi-mythical narrative, and this semi-mythical narrative eventually formed the basis of the Jewish religion. So now we know the basis of the Exodus story. It is clear that the Bible was created by joining together past historical events in a semi-mythical narrative, and this semi-mythical narrative eventually formed the basis of the Jewish religion. The so-called Canaanites, Phoenicians, are also thought to be of European ancestry, and carry the DNA marker of one of the so-called 7 daughters of Eve, called Jasmine. So yet again these people, which the Bible implies were the ancestors of the biblical Jews, cannot possibly be the biological ancestors of the Jews of today. The Minoan eruption of Thera, also referred to as the Thera eruption, was a major catastrophic volcanic eruption with a volcanic explosivity index of 6 or 7. Dated to the mid-2nd millennium BC, the eruption was one of the largest volcanic events on Earth in recorded history. It devastated the island of Thera, now called Santorini, including the Minoan settlement at Akrotiri and communities and agricultural areas on nearby islands and the coast of Crete, with a related earthquake and tsunami. There are no clear ancient records of the eruption, which may have inspired certain Greek myths, caused turmoil in Egypt, and been alluded to in a Chinese chronicle. The exact date of the eruption is disputed. The only gold object found at the excavation of Akrotiri, a small sculpture of an ibex that was hidden under a floor, a thorough evacuation in advance of the catastrophe, must have occurred since few artifacts and no corpses were buried in the ash. The eruption of Thera and volcanic fallout may have inspired the myths of the Titanomachy, in Hesiod's Theogony. The Titanomachy could have picked up elements of Western Anatolian folk memory, as the tale spread westward. Hesiod's lines have been compared with volcanic activity, citing Zeus's thunderbolts as volcanic lightning, the boiling earth and sea as a breach of the magma chamber, immense flame and heat as evidence of freeting explosions, among many other descriptions. In Greek mythology, the Titanomachy was a 10-year series of battles fought in Thessaly, consisting of most of the Titans, an older generation of gods, based on Mount Othrys, fighting against the Olympians, the younger generations, who would come to reign on Mount Olympus, and their allies. This event is also known as the War of the Titans, Battle of the Titans, Battle of the Gods, or just the Titan War. The war was fought to decide which generation of gods would have dominion over the universe. It ended in victory for the Olympian gods. A supervolcano's technical definition is a volcano that has a volcanic explosivity index of 7 or 8. A supervolcano also has to throw out more than 200 cubic kilometers of material. Mount St. Helens threw out 1.2 cubic kilometers. Mount St. Helens eruption in 1980 was about 400 megaton in power. The largest nuclear bomb ever detonated was around 50 megaton, and Mount St. Helens was not a supervolcano. This map is a part of the Atlas of Chernobyl pollution. Certain parts of Greece, together with southern Germany, the Salzburg area of Austria, northern Italy, and extended regions of the Scandinavian peninsula, are amongst the EU regions mostly contaminated after the Chernobyl nuclear accident. Other European countries with similar levels of contamination are Romania, Slovenia, Croatia and Bulgaria. The ground contamination was determined not only by the integrated concentrations of artificial radionuclides in air, but also by the rainfalls during the presence of the radioactive cloud. The heavy rainfalls in Western Macedonia and Thessalia during 1986 resulted in higher contamination of these regions as compared to Thrace, which is closer to Chernobyl. Nostradamus Quatrain 8:16 At the place where Hiram, Jason, had his ship built, there will be such a great sudden flood, that there will be no land to attack. The wave climbs Thessalian, Thessalian, Olympic, Mount Olympus, Greece. Democritus, ancient Greek pre-Socratic philosopher, remembered today for his formulation of an atomic theory of the universe. He proposed that all matter was composed of small indivisible particles called atoms. If we open up the latter part of the book of Genesis in the Old Testament, we read the intriguing account of the Israelite prince named Joseph, captured and sold as a slave in Egypt. In short, through a series of crazy events, he rises in power until he is also a prince of Egypt, second only to the Pharaoh himself. Then Joseph has a dream warning him of impending famine. So for 7 years, he stockpiles every spare bit of grain and food available in Egypt. Then, disaster. A famine hits the entire ancient world, that lasts for 7 years, and Egypt survives, as does likely the entire human race due to Prince Joseph's foresight. The description of this famine fits modern scenarios and projections of a nuclear winter following a global, all-out nuclear war, that is projected by modern meteorologists and war planners to last between 5 and 10 years. Read about it yourself in Genesis chapter 41. Twice towards the end of the chapter, it mentions the severity of the famine in relation to the entire world, and in looking at the original Hebrew text, it does indeed refer to the inhabitants of the entire earth, not just the Middle East. So let's go to another source of ancient written history. The history of India, as recorded in the Mahabharata, a land east of Israel. And I quote, directly from the manuscripts themselves, using flying machines called vimanas that were used to launch powerful weapons of destruction, the Mahabharata records that someone brought death to the people. The earth shook, scorched by the terrible heat of this weapon. Elephants burst into flames and ran to and fro in a frenzy, seeking a protection from terror. Over a vast area other animals crumpled to the ground and died. The waters boiled, and the creatures residing therein also died. From all points of the compass the arrows of the flame rained continuously. This destruction was caused by a single projectile charged with all the power of the universe. Elsewhere we read, an incandescent column of smoke and fire, as brilliant as 10,000 suns rose in all its splendor. It was the unknown weapon, the iron thunderbolt, a gigantic messenger of death. Continuing on, the corpses were so burnt that they were no longer recognizable. Hair and nails fell out. Pottery broke without cause. Birds, disturbed, circled in the air and were turned white. Foodstuffs were poisoned. Does this sound suspiciously like nuclear weapons to you too? Approximate date of this manuscript? Between 2000 BC and 3000 BC. The legends of Atlantis pretty much all refer to a very technologically advanced civilization with air flight capabilities, that disappeared beneath the sea in a single cataclysmic event. Some of the best modern research into the legends verify that the civilization likely did indeed exist, and that it was destroyed, presumably by a volcanic eruption, explosion like in Pompeii's destruction, or a nuclear explosion. The trouble is that they're not sure which volcano. Best estimate of a date for the disappearance of Atlantis? Roughly 2000 BC. The legends of Lemuria. Legends of Lemuria are even more spotty than those of Atlantis. But in brief, they were also supposedly very technologically advanced, and then disappeared suddenly. Then you have the Greek legends of the war collectively referred to as the Clash of the Titans. And while the specific details may have become shrouded in myth, the point remains, they agree that there was an incredibly destructive war fought between very advanced civilizations. Deep in the heart of Siberia, lies a strange valley where the locals fear to tread, because people that go there have a tendency to not come home. Indeed, even some modern explorers have fallen strangely and gravely ill when exploring this area, near Tunguska, site of an unexplained, massive, nuclear bomb-sized explosion about 100 years ago, long before World War II. The locals understandably call it the Valley of Death. But the weird part is that the locals also have legends associated with the valley. They include details of an ancient war fought between highly advanced races, using huge weapons located here that apparently were capable of shooting down threats from the air. Are you starting to understand that our human history does have record of this war? And does it also make more sense now why we have so little recorded human history prior to roughly 2000 BC? Of course, when the Romans burned the Library of Alexandria, we lost what little we had. When asked by a newspaper reporter about the first atomic explosion, Robert Oppenheimer, widely considered to be the father of the atomic bomb, apparently answered with something cryptic about the explosion being the first one in modern times. He is also widely noted to have quoted Indian history while watching his first nuclear explosion, "I'm become death, the destroyer of worlds." Frederick Soddy, a well-known physicist from around the turn of the last century, said this in 1909. "I believe that there have been civilizations in the past that were familiar with atomic energy, and that by misusing it they were totally destroyed."
"Boys, you picked the wrong night tonight. I'm ready for you. I'm kicking the ass tonight." And they were out of there. So there are ways to build your own strength if you want to resist. Do not give them fear. There is at least one group within this organization that enjoys and seeks and in fact manipulates the production of fear in us and takes it as we take energy from a battery. And I say don't give it to them. Give them something they don't want. Give them resistance.
I think that the Germans are not only interested in blood group B. I think they're also extremely interested in any of the rhesus negative blood, particularly O negative and actually AB negative. AB negative is the rarest of all of the rhesus negative blood groups. But going back to B, B positive or B negative blood group works like a hive blood group, works like a hive mind blood group. Not to say that anybody who has B blood is not an individual themselves, it's just on a collective level. They are working for a single agenda without knowing it. So if you could amass a huge amount of people with blood group B, then you could have sort of an army working for you, and each individual would be unknown that they are actually part of the collective.
They gobble up totally through the black budget, over 1/4 of the black budget, or roughly $310 billion. Of course, you may say, you know, where are these figures coming from? Well, the black budget, as we know it, in quote, black projects, which anything called black is significant of hidden from Congress, hidden from the American people, and very few people are even in the know about it at all. But black budget per year garners over $500 billion a year. And it's these kind of huge quantities and sums of monies are garnered through CIA drug activity, National Security Agency clandestine operations, mostly in Panama and South America.
A possible missile, rocket, or maybe airplane that was seen off the coast of California on Monday. Today there still aren't many answers as to what it actually was, but one woman says she has some answers. You'd be surprised to find out where she's getting her information from. Colleen Thomas is a home health administrator turned physicist who specializes in the science of creation. And she's the mother of a race of good aliens here on Earth called Pleiadians. She says she knows exactly what happened with that missile, and she joins me now from Roseville, California. Colleen, thanks so much for joining me. First of all, tell me what you know about what happened with that supposed missile.
It was I got in my ear, as it were, as I was sleeping, that it was a missile fire, President Obama trying to start a war with Iran. The Pleiadians downed the missile harmlessly at sea, and then last night from San Diego, our government fired another ICBM at the Pleiadians this time. But the Pleiadians ships are able to change density and do all kinds of things that these guys on this planet have never imagined. And a rocket could pass right through them and not harm them. And plus they can outrun it too if they wanted to just get out of the way. But it's really kind of silly to think that we can take on a race that's been around for many, many, many millions of eons longer than the reptilians.
And really briefly, Colleen, some people might not know exactly who the Pleiadians were, so why would President Obama want to fire an ICBM at the Pleiadians?
Because they're here to rescue the human beings who are being enslaved on this planet and forced into a paradigm of a super oligarchy that favors the Bilderberg Group and the Illuminati and is completely and utterly without any conscience towards the human beings whatsoever. They poison us deliberately in order for us to have to buy pharmaceuticals so that they can string our miserable little lives along on pharmaceuticals for the rest of our, aging days. There's no need for us to be in the kind of physical condition that we are in. But they put chemtrails in collusion with BP, British Petroleum. They put chemicals in jet fuel, and those chemicals end up getting sprayed in these minute particulates that rain down on our food, on our crops, and in our water. There's lithium in those chemtrails. There's also fluoride and a lot of other heavy metals that are dispersed in the air as chaff, so that the American government can talk to one another militarily without being listened in upon by other foreign countries. They know this stuff is toxic for us, but there's money in toxifying us, and so they work in collusion with the pharmaceutical companies with these backdoor deals, changing the laws and making everything favorable for these guys, but not favorable for the humans whatsoever. Humans are just commerce to these people, and they're also meat to these people. They not only kill and eat us, They sell our dead bodies on a meat market of their own kind that goes passing by here every 50 years, and I got that straight from a CIA agent.
And, you know, I know that you say that you have contact with the Pleiadians. How often do they talk to you, and what else do they say about the current situation in the United States right now? We're in a recession. There's talk about China surpassing us in the economy. I'm curious what the Pleiadians have to say about all of those issues, too.
They are working towards the peace of this planet and towards towards eradicating us of our draconian reptilian infestation.
You've been watching an OOWK media production. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please subscribe to our channel.